Welcome, everyone. Hope you had an enjoyable lunch. Thank you for reconvening for our plenary session 2 of the National Governors Association. As you all aware, last November the House passed and the President signed into law the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This long-awaited infrastructure package was the result of advocacy efforts by many governors and the work of the NGA. And I want to personally thank Governor Murphy, even though he is still tending to his responsibilities in New Jersey. But I want to thank him for his partnership as vice chair in helping to lead our efforts to get the bill past the finish line. This historic investment will help fund states and territories' core infrastructure priorities, including $300 billion in funding for state highway projects and programs, roughly $70 billion in investments in clean energy transmission upgrades, $40 billion in grants to states for broadband deployment and to make broadband more accessible for low-income families in rural and urban communities alike, $17 billion in port infrastructure, and $25 billion for airports to address repair and maintenance backlogs. Today, we're honored to be joined by a leader who will help us drive these infrastructure investments forward in our transportation sector, along with two of our members who were instrumental in advancing this historic legislation, for a discussion about how we can all put to use and benefit from the bipartisan Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. We are excited to have today's conversation with Secretary Pete Buttigieg. As mayor of South Bend, he worked to improve transportation safety and tackled some of the city's toughest problems. He gave people reasons to come downtown by taking a fresh look at the city's attributes. As mayor, he worked across the aisle to transform South Bend's future and improve people's everyday lives. Household income grew, poverty fell, and unemployment was cut in half. The city established new resources to extend opportunity and access to technology for all residents, and he launched a Smart Streets initiative to improve street design in the downtown and the historically under-resourced West Side. The complete street strategy led to benefits that included small business growth along previously neglected corridors and hundreds of millions of dollars in new private investment in the downtown that at one time was too empty. Now, as our nation's 19th Transportation Secretary, he'll be overseeing a record level of transportation funds as part of the infrastructure package. Secretary Buttigieg, I know I speak for all the governors when I say we're looking forward to working with you and spending these funds wisely and accountably. And also, Mr. Secretary, thanks for the good conversation we had with the governors previously at lunch. To lead the discussion will be Governor Hogan and Governor Whitmer leading our discussion with the Secretary. Last May, we were thankful to each of you for testifying on behalf of the Governor's infrastructure priorities before the Senate Environment and Public Works Committee. The law that we have today reflects so many of those advocacy principles, and we're grateful for your help shaping the legislation. And Governor Hogan, I know this was your initiative when you were chair of the NGA. It's appropriate that you kick this off. Governor Whitmer, I know that infrastructure is critically important to you as well and been an advocate for it in Michigan. But with that, Governor Hogan, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's great to be here, Governor. Great to be with you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for joining us. You know, the last time that all the governors were gathered here was 2 years ago for the NGA winter meeting. And I was the NGA chair, as Governor Hutchinson mentioned. We had a year-long infrastructure initiative that we were holding summits around the country and around the world and trying to come up with a package, a transformational infrastructure package. And it was near the end of that meeting where we had that first meeting with the whole federal government's leaders of the health agencies to warn us about what was just hitting our shores with COVID-19, and it's just hard to believe that's been 2 years, but we've put a lot behind us, including, I think the good news of getting this infrastructure deal done and making it happen. I think that's great bipartisan accomplishment. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your commitment, for collaborating with the governors. We're on the front lines trying to get infrastructure done. Thank you for coming to visit us in Baltimore, at the Port of Baltimore, where you're welcome back anytime. You can see some of those cranes unloading those big ships. I also want to thank all of my fellow governors who worked together on putting together a lot of these recommendations that the NGA came up with, especially Governor Whitmer, who hosted one of our infrastructure summits in Detroit. She, as was mentioned, joined me. The two of us went before the Senate committee and testified on behalf of the NGA. And I'm pleased to report that every single one of the NGA's recommendations in our infrastructure initiative was included in this bill. So I just want to thank all of the fellow governors. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for your leadership and cooperation. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague from the great state of Michigan, Governor Whitmer.
Thank you. Thank you, Governor Hogan. I'm so glad to be here. I'm very excited about this conversation. I ran on fixing the dam roads in Michigan. I think we're going to adjust that going into this next year and say fix the dams and roads. We got a lot of infrastructure work to do together, and I am excited and really appreciate the way that governors and the NGA have worked together to secure more resources so that we can fix our roadways and build a more resilient and equitable infrastructure system. So Secretary Buttigieg, I'd like to get things started by asking how the administration plans to help states and territories and get the ball rolling on these important infrastructure investments and give you an opportunity to get us started. So please take it away, Secretary.
Well, thank you so much, Governor Whitmer. I'm honored to be with you, with Governor Hogan, Governor Hutchison, and all of you, and I want to thank the NGA for having me. I'll just offer a couple of quick thoughts, and hopefully we can quickly get to the discussion. But first and foremost, I just want to thank and applaud the work that NGA did and that so many of you did individually. As you just shared in your opening remarks, both shaping the design of the President's historic bipartisan infrastructure law and the advocacy that made it a reality. We saw governors from so-called red states and so-called blue states alike calling for investments like this, as there have been calls for these investments for decades. And I'm very proud to be part of the administration that was able to deliver this law with bipartisan support. This law is going to do so much for so many people in every state, territory in the country. It's going to build a national network of electric charging stations, electric buses, so kids can go to school without being exposed to toxic fumes. It will expand transit in large and small communities alike so that commutes are faster and traffic is improved. It's going to give us a chance to modernize our supply chain infrastructure, building again on excellent work done by so many of the governors here to keep our economy moving. And of course, it's creating a generation of good-paying jobs across the country. It's a historic undertaking, and it's going to take years to fully realize this vision. In many ways, we are building cathedrals, but we're also getting to work immediately. In just the past 2 weeks, we have launched a bridge formula program that will repair up to 15,000 bridges around the country. We unveiled the National Roadway Safety Strategy to finally, fully, meaningfully address the crisis of preventable deaths on American roads. Just yesterday, we opened applications for our largest ever round of the RAISE discretionary grant program that will help realize projects to create jobs, make communities safer, and make transportation cleaner and more equitable. We recognize that this is a shared priority for everybody. There is no such thing as a Republican bridge or a Democratic bus system. People in every state, every territory, every community are counting on their infrastructure, and they're counting on us with a once-in-a-century opportunity to modernize that, to modernize the transportation systems and make them safer, cleaner, and more accessible for Americans from every generation to come. So we are looking forward to our work together to, on an accountable and swift basis, get these resources out to make a difference. And it is fitting that the governor has played such a role in shaping and delivering this law, because you and your state departments of transportation will also be the absolute front lines in making sure that we truly see the value of these investments delivered to the traveling public. So thanks again for everything that you do, and really looking forward to our discussion right now.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate your opening comments and thoughts about where we are headed. And having just come off my State of the State in Michigan, I can tell you we have rebuilt or addressed 13,198 lane miles and 903 bridges. And I only know that because I just gave the speech a couple days ago, but we're eager to turbocharge our efforts with all the assistance that we're getting from the federal government. We're so grateful. I'm going to turn it back to Governor Hogan before we open it up to all governors to be able to engage with the Secretary.
Yeah, very good. Thank you, Governor. Let me just, as an aside, let me just give you a quick story. The first time I met Governor Whitmer, it was the NGA seminar for new governors. We called Baby Governor School. And we were going around the table introducing the new governors, and she said she wanted to fix the damn roads. And I said, I think I'm going to work with her on infrastructure. So she's still working together with us on it. Thank you. Mr. Secretary, one of the things that was a big focus of our NGA initiative for a year all across the country, and we were in Australia and other places, and we were ultimately successful in getting it into the federal package, is public-private partnerships, P3s. In Maryland, we have some of the largest P3 projects in the world. We're building the Purple Line right outside of Washington here, tying into the metro system and Amtrak and Mark Train. We're working on a P3 to improve the gridlock on the Capitol Beltway and to build a new American Legion Bridge connecting Virginia and Maryland. We do P3s at our Port of Baltimore, at BWI Airport, and any number of, we're working on the Howard Street Tunnel with CSX in Baltimore to double stack trains. We're working with Amtrak on the BMP tunnel. So all of these are public-private partnerships. We were happy that this did get included into the bill. I think it's one more tool in the toolbox to help us stretch those federal dollars and to get even more private sector investment to expedite and to move forward on more projects. And so, my question for you would be, Mr. Secretary, what do you see as the future of public-private partnerships, P3s, in transportation infrastructure going into the next, say, 5 to 10 years, and how that the states can work with the federal government to provide incentives and to leverage even more both public and private sector capital for infrastructure?
Well, thank you, Governor, for the question. And this is an area that I think that we can do a lot of work in the next decade to fully develop. But we need to mobilize all of the capital that we can. A historic investment at the federal level in terms of public funds, but also that needs to be coupled with private sector activity if we really want to see our entire economy develop the way it needs to when it comes to our transportation systems and other infrastructure. And it's something that we have been proud to support in a number of ways here at USDOT, mainly through our Build America Bureau, which has supported up to $50 billion now through activities like private activity bonds, which will continue to be an opportunity, I think, to mobilize the right kind of private participation alongside public investment. And of course, That's just when we're talking about the role of the private sector in financing and structuring infrastructure opportunities. We also have an extremely important relationship with the private sector in delivering so many of the construction and improvement opportunities that are out there around the country. Certainly that's going to be the case, just to take one example, in the nationwide network of 500,000 electric vehicle chargers that the President has called for and that the infrastructure law will make possible. But really, there is no mode of transportation or form of infrastructure where we don't see a vital and central role for the private sector. And we continue to be interested in ways that states can lead or demonstrate proof of concept as well. Of course, we don't ever view private activity or private investment as a substitute for appropriate public investment, but it can be a crucially important supplement to the right kind of public goods support at the federal and state and local level, and welcome opportunities to continue to work with you on that.
Very good. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. With that, I'll see if my colleagues up here, Governor Whitmer, do you want to start off with a question before we go out to the folks in the round? Maybe we'll see if Governor Hutchinson has one too. But
yeah, I'd be happy
I'll turn it back to you.
Wonderful. All right, I'd be happy to. Mr. Secretary, in our earlier session, one of my colleagues said, you know, it doesn't matter where EVs are made, we need the infrastructure to support them. And I didn't get an opportunity to break in, but it does matter where they're made. I care where they're made. And as a governor of Michigan, it's always dangerous to speak for my friends from Ohio, but I'm pretty sure Governor DeWine cares where they're made as well, and a number of us do. But we're proud of our manufacturing transition that we are making, and I'm very excited about it. But being from a state that is rich in auto manufacturing history, could you describe how the transportation funding is going to help us better transition into electric vehicles?
Yes, thanks for that. You know, I come from the industrial Midwest as well. My hometown, South Bend, was really a company town for Studebaker, which made their last car in 1963, but that legacy really dominated the city even when I was growing up there. If you go to the Studebaker Museum, you will see their 1903, 1904 models of battery electric vehicles. And that was true really in a lot of the U.S. auto industry. Then, of course, things moved in a very different direction to the internal combustion engine, and yet now we're coming full circle. And it thrills me to see Detroit and Silicon Valley alike leading the way into an electric vehicle future. We think that the future is electric no matter what. The reason that policy is so important is to secure at least three things that I think won't happen no matter what. Number one, will the transition to electric happen fast enough to support our climate needs at a moment when the climate crisis is bearing down on us? Number two, will it be made in America by American companies and American workers on American soil, creating American jobs for American families? And three, will it happen in an equitable way? And that's especially important because many of the drivers who could theoretically benefit the most from the transition to electric are lower income drivers and rural drivers who drive longer distances and have more to gain from the fuel savings. But that only happens if they can afford the vehicles up front. And of course, if there is the charging infrastructure in every part of this country to make sure that they can confidently buy those EVs and know they'll be able to get where they need to go. That's why we're so excited about the $7.5 billion that this bill puts forward in funding for a nationwide electric vehicle charging network. And we want to work with the states. In fact, we must work effectively with the states in order to deliver this. As part of the Formula program, which is $5 billion, the majority of that, we are working with a joint energy office that was set up with the Department of Energy. The Secretary Granholm and I and our departments really joined at the hip on structuring this program. We're going to review those state plans as they come in, knowing that the answers are going to be very different from one state to another. I want to be clear, this is another great example of where private and public meet. We're not seeking to have 500,000 electric vehicle chargers owned and operated by the federal government. What we're trying to do is leverage something where we know that if it is left without any kind of policy intervention, we won't get the results that we need in terms of climate equity and American jobs. But if we get it right, we can supercharge, no pun intended, the accessibility of these vehicles to everybody. That means working out where the electric vehicle chargers need to go. It means making sure we make it make sense for people in every kind of community, from very dense communities where the big challenge is that you don't have a garage or a plug in the wall that you can plug your car into. So we need to make sure the charging stations are there. And at the opposite end, very wide open spaces where we got to make sure that across a 200-mile drive that there will be chargers along the way. This is something we can't do alone, but we can do together, and we are enthusiastic about quickly deploying these dollars in partnership with you through both formula and discretionary programs to really stand up that charging network that is going to be one of the biggest pieces of the story of a made in America electric vehicle revolution in the 2020s.
That's great.
Yeah, good. Thank you. We're going to go ahead and open up the floor to questions from the governor. Mr. Chairman, did you want to start out with one?
Well, let me ask, I know we've got a number of questions, but let me go ahead with this, Secretary. I know that the President has an appreciation for unions and that there is some preferences, I understand, in the bill for union work being done. And I'm concerned that if there is discretionary funds that are being allocated by the department, and you've got one project that has union worker support, maybe it's a union state, but you've also have an application from a right to work state that does not have a union mechanism or support for the contract. Will those be treated equally? And how does that preference for union work fit with right to work states and the fact that we have very little union labor in our state?
Well, as you know and as you acknowledge, this is an administration led by a president who, we are very proudly pro-worker. We believe in what unions can do for American communities and for American families. I also recognize that the reality is different in a lot of states, even just in terms of state laws and how they interact with the workforce. When it comes to the discretionary programs, what I'll say is that we're going to be very transparent about our policy goals, and they are many. Of course, creating good-paying American jobs is one of the biggest reasons this bill was passed in the first place. That goal sits alongside a number of goals around safety, around economic growth, around climate equity, and others that are within the parameters set forth by the law, of course, going to be made as transparent as we can make them in the guidance that goes out for these discretionary grant programs. What I'll say, especially in many of our flagship programs like RAISE, is that there's not generally one policy goal that kind of multiplies all of the other ones by zero. But I'll also say that, of course, there is a benefit to meeting as many of our policy goals as possible at the same time. Look, sometimes you'll see a project that is so outstanding with regard to safety that we don't expect it to be a flagship program from maybe a climate or equity standpoint, but simply want to make sure that it's not negative in those regards while it does this enormously positive thing on safety. Sometimes it'll be the other way around. But we welcome the chance to work with you to make sure that across different states with different realities in terms of labor laws, that this creates a huge wind at your back for the goals of improving transportation for everybody and our shared goals of creating good paying jobs, which I hope regardless of particular state political patterns, we all agree that creating as many good-paying American jobs that can't be outsourced as possible is something that we're excited about and that we can do with this infrastructure investment.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go to the table, and I'm sure some of the governors have some questions for the Secretary. Who wants to go first? Governor Stitt?
Yep, Governor.
Oklahoma.
Thank you, Governor. Thank you, Secretary. Appreciate your service. You know, in Oklahoma, our goal is to top 10 everything we do, and right now we're number 7 in bridge conditions. So we're really excited about that. It's been a focus in our state for the last 15 years or so, and we've made a huge headway there. But right now, I'm focused on highway safety, and currently we're number 45th right now. I have this governor's scorecard. I track these different metrics, but we're 45th in fatalities, and so we're really focused on the rural 2-lane roads, adding shoulders all through these areas. And with the administration getting such a historic level of discretionary funding, you know, what are you going to do to help make sure that rural states with those rural highways, those shoulders, we've got a fair shot at some of those dollars into states like Oklahoma?
Well, first of all, I want to applaud your choice to prioritize roadway safety. We just released our national roadway safety strategy. As you know, there are far too many fatalities on American roads, and we're really eager to team up with you and your counterparts to do something about it. I also want to point to the fact that we take very seriously our responsibility to support people in every part of the country in places rural and urban alike. And one thing I would point to is that that last round of grants through the RAISE program, we went above the statutory threshold for support for rural projects. And I consider it important for us to continue to show that kind of support. In terms of how we make sure that happens, part of that is, of course, we are going to take rural applications very seriously and look at visions that are the right answer, knowing it isn't one size fits all. For you know, places with a lot of dense urban areas versus those rural roads that you're describing. We're also looking to make sure that we make our processes as user-friendly, so to speak, as possible. Look, we're standing up 40 new programs just in transportation alone. And that's on top of the existing ones, from RAISE to the Port Infrastructure Development Program and the Highway Safety Improvement Program, that are already on the books but are seeing more funding thanks to this law. I recognize the risk of enormous complexity being created that makes it harder for smaller communities, smaller states, and rural states to compete just by virtue of the process of navigating. The application.
I don't know if the Secretary knows. He's a little frozen.
Is how do we make the process as simple as we can in order for states to navigate?
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I think Governor Cooper had a question.
Mr. Secretary, we thank you very much for spending so much time with us today and spending lunch with us. Also grateful for your couple of visits to North Carolina to celebrate our progress in rail and electric vehicles. The President, I think, has recognized, although a lot of money is going through the Department of Transportation, that this is going to be important that we don't approach this in a siloed way, and that there's going to be a lot of interagency, interdepartmental decision-making going on. And obviously he's appointed Mayor Landrieu to try and bring that together on the federal level, and many governors have followed suit. I know in my state, my Department of Environmental Quality, my Department of Information Technology, Commerce, Transportation, we're coordinating all of that. And we know that when we're looking at transportation, we're also looking at environmental resiliency, we're looking at high-speed internet access. With the discretionary investments that are going to be made, can you give me some idea of what you guys would be looking for most in states that are looking to merge funding sources together to make progress in this infrastructure arena?
Thanks, Governor. It's a great point, and one where I think there are some great examples in your state that I saw in my travels with the Vice President there, and have seen in so many places around the country. Look, family budgets aren't siloed, right? People pay for housing and transportation in the same month. And yet the org chart of the executive branch of the federal government doesn't really reflect that reality. So I appreciate you making sure that your administration does, and we're trying to do that as well. In terms of what that looks like in practice, I'll offer a handful of examples that are worth thinking about. One is transit-oriented development. Right? We need to welcome and encourage states and communities that are finding ways to stitch together housing or development dollars with transit dollars that are going to help people be closer to work, not just in terms of miles, but in terms of minutes. Because sometimes what's really going to make the difference is not geography, but options to get across that geography with the right kind of transit or transportation. So that's an area where I've discussed a lot with Secretary Fudge and HUD how we can show support for that. Also, that's certainly true around resilience, right? Where when you're considering, maybe from an economic development perspective, how a highway ought to be routed. It makes sense to also consider its possible relevance as an evacuation route when hurricanes are becoming more frequent. And as we put together our guidance for things like the forthcoming Protect program, which is a grant program specifically for the purpose of building resilience, that's something that we'll be thinking about. Also, cannot emphasize enough the value of dig once, especially when you consider, across the interagency, we've got water and wastewater projects, we got highway and road and rail projects, and then we've got this effort to get broadband internet to every single person in America. So shame on us if we dig a place up to lay the fiber and then 2 years later are digging it up again to lay pipe, and then 3 years later are tearing up the highway that sits over it. We got to find ways to coordinate that, and I know some of the best ways to do it, since you're the ones actually deploying the funds most of the time, are actually going to come up to us from the states rather than coming down from on high. And we want to work with you on that, see who's doing it well, and then try to help spread those ideas across the various states and territories, because it'll make a huge difference to how much bang for our buck we get. And even a colossal sum like the $1 trillion+ of this infrastructure law will go very quickly if we're not smart about getting the absolute most impact for it.
Thank you. Governors? Governor Mills.
Thank you. About 8 weeks from now, we'll be engaged in the perennial famous biggest pothole in Maine contest. The one that won last year was big enough to swallow up a Volkswagen. And so we're delighted to have the partnership with the federal government in addressing these roads and bridge problems, and the infrastructure money for internet as well, broadband. Meanwhile, for the last 10 years, our roads primarily have been simply resurfaced with skinny mix, potholes filled with gravel and the like, and not substantially redone. So we're looking forward to using the $2.4 billion I think we expect to receive from the bipartisan infrastructure bill to seriously repair, rebuild the roads, not just skinny mix them. And we also have 3,700 bridges in Maine, 58% of which are older than 50 years old, which is pretty scary. We're an old state and a multi-season state, and things age pretty quickly. But so we're looking forward to having those funds and to also using the dig once policy. One of the problems that I think was brought up earlier is that with the labor shortage everybody's seeing, and with the supply chain issues, every time we go out to bid on a project, we're getting higher bids than our estimates. And so we're trying to parse that out so that we don't put all the money out the door too quickly, federal and state funds together. And I trust that the federal government will be flexible in how that money is parsed out so that we can not simply fix 10 roads over here and no roads over here with expansion of dollars that we're getting. But I want to thank the administration and you, Secretary Buttigieg, also for your cooperation and the open door policy that you've had for the states, and we welcome continued dialogue.
Well, thank you so much, Governor. And on the latter point, absolutely agree that we should be smart about the flow of these dollars. And remember how different this is from 2009, when the Stimulus Act then was passed with the explicit goal of getting as many dollars pumped into the economy as quickly as humanly possible. Now, of course, we're excited for shovel-ready projects and ready for things that we hope to be out there celebrating in very short order. But this is really about building for the next decade. And so as you're thinking about programming these funds, not knowing how economic conditions, labor availability, or supply chains will look in the third quarter of 2025 compared to how they look right now, we should find ways to take into account where there is greatest scarcity now and where there could be some smoothing of those curves. On the former point, you're absolutely speaking my language when you talk about aggregates and pavement substances, because this is obviously very much second nature to any mayor or former mayor. As mayors, our number one natural enemy and prey was the common American pothole. And so I came to this department very motivated to help make sure that road quality is improved. And let me mention that that's not just something that's driving the sheer volume of dollars that we're sending out to the states and know that you all effectively through those formulas will put to work, but also supporting research on the very important, rather unsexy topic of how to improve the durability of our paving materials. Think about the sheer dollars going into this in your state alone and how much an even 2 or 3% increase in the amount of time that a given piece of paving could survive, especially in northern winters, how that would translate in terms of taxpayer benefit and taxpayer savings. So the research agenda of this department is probably the least well known and celebrated, unless you happen to host one of our university transportation centers, but something that as maybe a bit of a nerdy pursuit, I'm passionate about, because I think there's enormous gains to be made in something as basic and as literally fundamental as what our transportation infrastructure is made of.
Mr. Secretary, one of the points that Governor Mills had in her question was about flexibility. And that's one of the things I've heard from nearly all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, is that most of the governors really want to make sure that we get as much flexibility, that the states can utilize these dollars in the ways that we think can be best utilized in our states. And that's, I think, the one part, it was a great answer, and I want to see these potholes that swallow the Volkswagen, but glad we don't have any of those. But on the flexibility, I think that's a topic that a lot of the governors would like to hear about. We're still waiting for the guidance. I mean, if some people think, we've already got the money, and how come we haven't already used it? And we don't have the money, and we don't have the guidance for how to use the money, and so we can't make final decisions.
So I recognize the value of flexibility for you and your respective departments of transportation to be able to effectively deploy these dollars. And what I can commit to you right now is that we will work with you to ensure that there's the best level of flexibility that we can deliver, consistent, of course, with our core commitments about standards, expectations, and the values and priorities that guided the creation of this bill and the guide that our administration. We get that there are multiple ways to get to these shared goals that we have around economic growth, around safety, around climate readiness, future readiness, equitable transportation, and that there's no one size that fits all. And while some of the dollars are already starting to move, we loaded up the bridge formula dollars into the Federal Highway Administration system, I think last week. We just put out the guidance yesterday for the RAISE program. The majority of the programs, we are still framing that guidance, and it's emerging in the next next weeks to months. I will tell you, we are interested in your input in how to make sure that these programs are ones that your teams can work with, and that, again, maintaining a very high standard, of course, but that given that high standard, that the appropriate flexibilities are there for you to be able to deliver.
Thank you. We're going to go to a couple more questions. Governor Carney.
Thank you again, Mr. Secretary, for joining us for this session as well and for all your time. Another vote for flexibility as well, and also simplicity over complexity in the rulemaking. We mentioned a little talk about timing in the last session. Could you comment on that with respect to the port infrastructure section there, as well as existing programs and new programs, and what you expect there, particularly from a timing perspective? Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Yeah, so the Port Infrastructure Development Program has the benefit of being an existing program that just got added to in scale. And for that reason, we'll be able to move quite quickly. Just before Christmas, we were able to announce the last round, about $240 million of grants there. We're very close to being able to take applications for the new rounds, and we'll do so with a level of funding we've not had before. So we're very eager to get that moving, largely because the president is very eager in keeping with the port's action plan that he initiated and put us on a clock in terms of getting that guidance out and getting the applications in. Same thing on the RAISE grants. The notice of funding opportunity is out, so you are now's the time to send in applications. The dollars on the federal highway side for the bridges, they can be obligated now, but some of these are going to take more time. Right? We've never had something like the PROTECT program, a dedicated federal funding program for resilience investments that we know are needed in different ways and for different reasons, but literally everywhere in the United States. So what we're doing in terms of safety, the Safe Streets for All program is really a new creation. We want to get it right. Now we want to design it in a way that's useful. Of course, we want to get those dollars out the door quickly. So I think it's safe to say that as you check in with our department, even every couple of weeks, you're going to see new news for the rest of the first half of this year. And our commitment is to, obviously, we want to take great care to do this right and accountably, but we recognize the importance of doing it swiftly. And I can tell you that that eagerness and strategic impatience in this administration comes right from the top.
Governor Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and I picked up on your notice about how to cover roads, what we need to do to cover potholes and all that sort of stuff. As refining gets much more efficient, of course, asphalt becomes more dear. As we move to biofuels, it's even more dear. So we would welcome your participation. We've looked at coal as a possibility for asphalt as a substitute. Research at the University of Wyoming has really indicated some positive results on that. So we'd welcome your participation in that research.
Well, thanks. I would be very interested to learn more about that. Certainly, when you talk about the kind of carbon that can be contained in forms of cement. Right now, obviously, the cement making process is a big source of emissions, but there's actually such thing as a carbon negative concrete. And similarly, I'd be very curious about what you're describing in terms of coal, since embedding it into a surface obviously is much more beneficial from a carbon perspective than setting it on fire. So I look forward to hearing about that cutting edge research and learning more about how we might be able to put it to work.
Yeah, we would welcome that as both North Dakota and us are carbon negative states.
Yeah, maybe time for another question. If anybody's got one. Doesn't look like it. Well, we want to thank the Secretary. You spent a lot of time answering questions at lunch as well, but I'll kick it back to my colleagues to see if they've got any closing comments. But I'll just say thank you very much, Mr. Secretary, to spend all this time with us and being so open and communicating with all the governors.
I concur. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank really for setting the stage for an incredible opportunity for our country and partnership between the administration, our federal partners, and and the states. And the governors will be right there to help you make sure that money is wisely spent. So thank you for your perspective, your time you've given us very richly today of your background, but also your passion for this. And so with that, this session concludes. I know we've got some more work this afternoon. Thank each of you, and we will conclude this session. Thank you.
Thank you.
And for someone else, but not for me.